Harold, a 72-year-old farmer widowed for 3 years, discovers that his only daughter, Sarah, has secretly put their 150-year-old family farm up for sale without his knowledge. Devastated by the betrayal and struggling with health issues that she used as justification, Harold finds himself forced to confront not only the imminent loss of his family heritage, but also the broken relationship with the daughter he raised on his own. When a mysterious buyer appears willing to pay the full price in cash, Harold embarks on an emotional journey of discovery, forgiveness, and second chances that will forever transform his understanding of family, legacy, and the true meaning of home. The morning I discovered my daughter's betrayal started like any other. I was sitting on my front porch at 5:47 a.m., watching the sunrise paint the wheat fields gold, when I noticed the white sedan pulling into my gravel driveway. My old bones creaked as I stood up from the wooden chair that had been my morning companion for the past 15 years, the same chair where Martha used to join me with her coffee before the cancer took her 3 years ago. I didn't recognize the car, but I recognized the look on the man's face as he stepped out. All business, clipboard in hand, camera hanging around his neck. Real estate appraiser. My stomach dropped like a stone thrown into Miller's Pond. "Morning, sir," he called out, adjusting his tie as he walked toward me. "I'm here for the property assessment. Are you Mr. Harold Brennan?" The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I kept my voice steady. "I am, but I didn't call for any assessment." He consulted his clipboard, looking confused. "Says here Sarah Brennan Matthews scheduled this for today. She indicated she had power of attorney?" Power of attorney. The phrase echoed in my mind like a curse. I remembered signing those papers 6 months ago when I'd had my heart episode. Sarah had been so insistent, so caring, telling me it was just a precaution, that she'd never use it unless I was unable to make decisions for myself. "Just in case, Daddy," she'd said, using that sweet voice that had gotten her out of trouble since she was 5 years old. "There's been some mistake," I managed to say, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew there hadn't been. My daughter, my only child, the little girl I'd raised alone after her mother died in childbirth, the woman I'd put through college by working double shifts at the grain elevator, had gone behind my back. The appraiser looked uncomfortable. "Sir, maybe you should call your daughter. I can come back another time if there's been a miscommunication." After he left, I stood in my kitchen, staring at the rotary phone that had hung on the same hook since 1987. Martha had picked out that yellow color because she said it made the room feel sunny, even on cloudy days. My hands shook as I dialed Sarah's number in Chicago. "Daddy?" Her voice was bright, cheerful, completely normal. It made my anger burn hotter. "Sarah Elizabeth." I used her full name, the way I had when she was in trouble as a child. "Want to explain why there's a real estate appraiser in my driveway?" The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard her sigh, that same frustrated sound she used to make when I caught her sneaking cookies before dinner. "Daddy, we need to talk about this reasonably. You're 72 years old, you had a heart attack 6 months ago, and you're living alone on 300 acres. What happens if something happens to you? What if you fall and no one finds you for days?" "That's my choice to make," I said, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles went white. "No, it's not anymore. I have legal authority to make decisions about your care and your assets. Dr. Morrison said you have early signs of cognitive decline." "Dr. Morrison said I was sharp as a tack," I interrupted. "You asked him about one missed appointment, and he said anyone could be forgetful. The farm is worth $2.8 million, Daddy. That money could pay for the best assisted living facility, round-the-clock care if you need it. You could be comfortable and safe." Comfortable and safe. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. This farm had been in the Brennan family for 5 generations. My great-great-grandfather had claimed this land in 1873, built the first cabin with his own hands. Every generation had added something. The barn, the grain silos, the farmhouse where I'd been born, where Sarah had been born, where Martha and I had planned to grow old together. "This is my home, Sarah. It's a farm that's too much work for a man your age. Be realistic, Daddy. When was the last time you actually farmed? You lease most of the land to the Henderson boys anyway." She was right about that, but she was missing the point entirely. It's not about the farming, it's about the legacy. It's about family. I am thinking about family. I'm thinking about making sure you don't die alone out there because you're too stubborn to accept help. Her voice cracked on the last words, and I heard something I hadn't expected, genuine fear. For just a moment, I softened. She was scared. My little girl was scared of losing me the same way we'd both lost Martha. Suddenly and without warning, But then she spoke again, and the business-like tone was back. "I've already accepted an offer. The buyer is willing to pay full asking price, cash, with a 30-day close. You can pack what you want to keep, and I'll arrange for movers to take everything to the assisted living place I found. It's really nice, Daddy. They have activities and—" "You accepted an offer." The words came out as a whisper. "Without even telling me. I knew you'd react this way. I knew you'd fight me, and I couldn't watch you deteriorate out there alone while you refused all help." I hung up the phone. For the next hour, I walked through my house like a ghost, seeing everything with new eyes. The kitchen table where Martha and I had played cards every Sunday night. The living room where Sarah had practiced piano recitals, where we'd watched her perform in the Christmas pageant on the old VHS player. The bedroom where Martha had died, where I still slept on only my side of the bed, because moving to the middle felt like giving up on her completely. 3 years. It had been 3 years since Martha passed, and Sarah had been patient. I'd give her that. She'd called every week, visited every month, suggested gently that maybe I should consider moving closer to her in Chicago. I'd always said no, and she'd always dropped it, until now. I made my way to the barn, where dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the high windows. This was where my father had taught me to fix engines, where I'd taught Sarah to drive the old tractor when she was 12. She'd been fearless then, eager to learn everything about the farm, talking about all the improvements she'd make when it was hers someday. When had that changed? When had my farm become a burden to her instead of a blessing? That evening, as I sat on the porch again watching the sunset, I saw another car coming up the drive. This one I recognized, Sarah's silver SUV. She'd driven down from Chicago, probably the moment she hung up the phone. She got out slowly, looking older than her 43 years in the fading light. The stress lines around her eyes were deeper than I remembered, and her usually perfect blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She climbed the porch steps like she was walking to her execution. "Daddy," she said softly. "Sarah." She sat down in Martha's chair, the one I hadn't let anyone else use since the funeral. I should have told her to move, but something in her expression stopped me. "I know you hate me right now," she began. "I don't hate you. I'm disappointed. There's a difference." She winced. "I know I should have talked to you first. I know I should have, but every time I tried, you shut down the conversation. You wouldn't even discuss getting someone to check on you regularly." "I don't need a babysitter. You fell last month," Mrs. Patterson told me. "You were unconscious for who knows how long, and if she hadn't come by to bring you those tomatoes, I slipped on wet leaves. It happens. What if it happens again? What if next time no one comes by?" Her voice broke. "I can't lose you the way we lost Mom. I can't get a call from the sheriff saying they found you dead in a field somewhere because you were too proud to accept help." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw the frightened little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. After Martha died, it had been just the two of us against the world. I'd been everything to her: father, mother, protector, provider. Maybe I'd done too good a job, because now she thought it was her turn to protect me. "So your solution is to sell my home out from under me?" "My solution is to make sure you live long enough for us to have this conversation 100 more times," she snapped, then immediately looked sorry for raising her voice. "The assisted living place is beautiful, Daddy. You'd have your own apartment, but there's a dining room where you can eat with other people, activities, a nurse on staff. You wouldn't be isolated anymore." "I'm not isolated. I have neighbors, I have friends in town. When was the last time you had dinner with someone? When was the last time you went to church or to Miller's Diner, or anywhere except the grocery store?" I opened my mouth to argue, but closed it again. She was right. Since Martha died, I'd been living like a hermit, content with my memories and my routines. The farm had become my entire world, and maybe that wasn't healthy, but it was my choice. "Who's buying it?" I asked finally. "I don't know. It's going through a real estate investment company. They're paying cash, no inspection, quick close. The agent said it's probably someone who wants to develop it. Develop it? Turn my family's legacy into cookie-cutter houses or strip malls. The thought made me physically sick. "Sarah, this farm has been in our family for 150 years. Your great-great-great-grandfather built that cabin with his bare hands. Every person buried in the family cemetery lived and died on this land. It's not just property, it's who we are. And what good is it doing anyone sitting empty except for one stubborn old man who's too proud to admit he needs help?" The words hung between us like a slap. I saw her realize what she'd said, saw the immediate regret in her eyes, but it was too late to take it back. "I think you should leave," I said quietly. "Daddy, I didn't mean—I think you should leave." She stood up slowly, tears starting to track down her cheeks. I love you, Daddy. Everything I'm doing because I love you. Love doesn't give you the right to betray someone." She flinched as if I'd hit her, but she didn't argue. She just walked to her car, got in and drove away, leaving me alone with the crickets and the weight of knowing that in 30 days, everything I'd ever loved would be gone. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. These walls had heard 5 generations of laughter, tears, arguments, and reconciliations. Soon they'd hear bulldozers instead. I thought about Martha, wondered what she would have done. She'd always been better with Sarah than I was, better at finding the middle ground between stubborn independence and necessary compromise. But Martha wasn't here, and I was facing the biggest crisis of my life completely alone. Outside, an owl hooted in the old oak tree, the same tree where I'd built Sarah a swing when she was 7, where she'd carved her initials next to a boy's when she was 16, where she'd come to cry when that same boy broke her heart. Soon, even that tree might be gone. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but all I could think about was how to stop a future that was already written, signed, and sealed by the daughter I'd raised to be strong and independent. Maybe I'd done too good a job after all. The next morning brought no relief from the nightmare my life had become. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning while my mind raced through possibilities that all led to the same dead end. At 5:30 a.m., I gave up on sleep entirely and made my way to the kitchen, where the yellow rotary phone seemed to mock me from its perch on the wall. I had 29 days to figure out how to stop a legal sale that my own daughter had orchestrated using powers I'd foolishly given her. 29 days to save a legacy that had taken 5 generations to build. The weight of it settled on my chest like a boulder. I was pouring my second cup of coffee when I heard footsteps on the front porch. Through the kitchen window, I saw a figure I hadn't expected. Tom Patterson from the neighboring farm, Martha's old friend's husband. Tom was 75, 3 years older than me, and had been farming the adjacent property for nearly 50 years. "Harold," he called through the screen door. "You decent? Need to talk to you." I let him in, noting the grim expression on his weathered face. Tom wasn't one for social visits, especially not at dawn. He settled his lanky frame into one of the kitchen chairs, declining my offer of coffee with a wave of his hand. "Heard about your situation," he said without preamble. Word travels fast in small towns. I shouldn't have been surprised. In a community of 800 people, news spread faster than prairie fire. I suppose everyone knows by now. Most folks are just gossiping, but some of us are concerned. This farm, it's part of the backbone of this county, Harold. Your family's been here since before the railroad came through. It means something. I sat down across from him, studying his lined face. Tom Patterson had never been what you'd call a sentimental man. If he was here talking about legacy and meaning, something else was going on. "What aren't you telling me, Tom?" He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Been talking to some of the other farmers. We're worried about who's buying your place. Word is, it's some big investment company from back east. You know what that usually means." I did know. Development. Strip malls. Housing subdivisions with names like Countryside Estates that destroyed the actual countryside to exist. You think they're going to develop it? 300 acres of prime agricultural land, 10 minutes from the interstate? Harold, they're not buying it to grow corn. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. We've been talking. Me, Bill Henderson, the Morrison boys, even old Frank Tucker. We want to make an offer. An offer. A counter-offer. Pool our resources, buy your farm ourselves, keep it agricultural. Maybe lease it back to you for as long as you want to stay in the house. That way it stays in farming hands, stays part of the community. The idea hit me like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Can you match their offer? Tom's face fell slightly. That's the problem. We can come up with maybe $2 million between all of us, and that's stretching everyone thin. Sarah's buyer is offering $2.8 million cash, $800,000. It might as well have been $8 million. I watched my brief surge of hope crumble into dust. There's got to be another way, I said, more to myself than to Tom. Maybe there is. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his shirt pocket. Got a call from a lawyer in town yesterday, fellow named Marcus Webb. He wants to meet with you today about your situation. Said it was urgent. Marcus Webb. I knew the name. He'd handled Martha's will, helped us with some property disputes over the years. He was honest, which was more than you could say for most lawyers, but I couldn't imagine what he could do that would change anything. What time? 10 o'clock, his office. Harold, Tom stood up, placing a weathered hand on my shoulder. I know this is hard. Losing Martha, now this with Sarah, but don't give up yet. Sometimes help comes from where you least expect it. After Tom left, I found myself walking through the house again, but this time with different eyes. Instead of seeing memories I was about to lose, I started seeing details I'd forgotten. The way the morning light hit the living room just right, casting everything in gold. The little pencil marks on the doorframe where we'd measured Sarah's height every year until she turned 16 and decided she was done growing. If this is touching your heart, tell me from which part of the world you are listening to this story. At 9:45, I drove my old Ford pickup into town, past the grain elevator where I'd worked for 30 years, past Miller's Diner where Martha and I had our first date in 1975, past the church where we'd been married and where her funeral had been held. Everything looked the same but felt different somehow, like I was seeing it all through a lens of impending loss. Marcus Webb's office was in a converted Victorian house on Main Street, the same building where old Doc Peterson used to have his practice before he retired. The waiting room still smelled faintly of antiseptic and old wood polish. Marcus appeared in the doorway to his office before I'd even sat down. He was younger than I'd remembered, maybe 50, with graying temples and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Brennan, thank you for coming on such short notice. Please, come in." His office was lined with law books and family photos, but what caught my attention was the stack of papers on his desk and the serious expression on his face. "I'll get straight to the point," Marcus said, settling behind his desk. "I've been contacted by the buyer of your property. They want to meet with you." Sarah's buyer? Why would they want to meet with me? That's what I found interesting. Usually, when investment companies buy property for development, they avoid any contact with the previous owners. Too much potential for complications, emotional appeals, that sort of thing. But this buyer specifically requested a face-to-face meeting before the sale closes. I frowned. What kind of complications? Well, for one thing, your daughter may have overstepped her authority. Power of attorney for healthcare decisions doesn't automatically grant power of attorney for financial decisions, especially when the principal is demonstrably competent to make their own choices. A spark of hope flared in my chest. Are you saying the sale might not be legal? I'm saying it's complicated. Your daughter filed paperwork claiming you're no longer capable of managing your affairs due to cognitive decline. But I've known you for 15 years, Harold. You're as sharp as you ever were. A judge might very well side with you if you contest the sale. But that would mean taking my own daughter to court. Marcus leaned back in his chair. That's a decision only you can make. But here's the thing. The buyer wants to meet with you first. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., right here in my office. They're flying in from New York specifically for this meeting. Flying in from New York? For a farm in Iowa? That's what I thought was odd too. Harold, in 30 years of practice, I've never seen anything quite like this. Usually, corporate buyers want to close fast and clean, no complications. This feels personal somehow. Personal. The word stuck in my mind as I drove home, past the same familiar landmarks that now felt like they were slipping away from me. What could be personal about my farm to someone in New York? We didn't have any family there, no business connections I could think of. That afternoon, I found myself in the family cemetery behind the house, standing in front of Martha's grave. The headstone was simple granite, just her name and dates, with a small engraving of wheat stalks at the bottom. Her choice, made years before she'd needed it. "I don't know what to do, Martha," I said aloud, feeling only slightly foolish. "Our daughter thinks she's protecting me, but she's destroying everything we built together. And now there's this mysterious buyer who wants to meet me for reasons I can't understand." The wind rustled through the corn in the distant fields, and for just a moment I could almost hear Martha's voice. "Sometimes the answer isn't what you expect, Harold. Sometimes you have to trust that things happen for a reason." I'd never been much of a believer in fate or divine intervention, but standing there among 5 generations of Brennan family graves, I felt connected to something larger than myself. My great-great-grandfather Patrick had faced his own impossible odds when he'd claimed this land in 1873. The banks had failed, crops had been destroyed by drought and locusts, and he'd nearly lost everything twice. But he'd held on, and because he'd held on, 4 more generations had called this place home. Maybe it was time to fight like a Brennan again. That evening, I called Sarah. She answered on the first ring, and I could hear the hope and apprehension in her voice. "Daddy? I'm meeting with your buyer tomorrow." Silence then. "Why?" "Daddy, please don't make this harder than it already is. The papers are signed, the money is in escrow. The lawyer says the sale might not be legal, says you overstepped your authority. I was protecting you. You were making decisions that weren't yours to make." I kept my voice calm, though my heart was racing. I'm 72, Sarah, not 92. I had one heart episode that I've recovered from completely. Having a bad memory day doesn't make me incompetent. You could have died, Daddy, when Mrs. Patterson found you unconscious. But I didn't die. I'm still here. I'm still capable, and I'm still the legal owner of this farm until a judge says otherwise. Another long silence. When she spoke again, her voice was small, wounded. So you're going to fight me. You're going to drag this through the courts and make me the villain who tried to steal her father's farm. The pain in her voice nearly broke my resolve. This was my daughter, the little girl I'd raised alone, the woman who'd held my hand through Martha's funeral and called me every week for 3 years to make sure I was okay. But she was also the woman who'd gone behind my back and tried to sell my birthright. I'm going to do whatever it takes to save my home, I said finally. If that makes me the villain in your story, then so be it. I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of better times, preparing for a battle I'd never wanted to fight. Tomorrow, I would meet the mysterious buyer from New York, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to keep my world from falling apart. But as I climbed the stairs to bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would bring revelations I wasn't prepared for. The morning of the meeting, I woke up before dawn with a knot in my stomach that felt like it was tied with barbed wire. I'd barely slept, my mind churning with questions about who this mysterious buyer could be and what they wanted from me. By 6 a.m., I'd given up on rest entirely and was sitting on my porch watching the sunrise and trying to prepare myself for whatever was coming. At exactly 1:45 p.m., I walked into Marcus Webb's office. I'd dressed in my best clothes, the navy suit I'd worn to Martha's funeral, polished dress shoes that pinched my feet, and the tie Sarah had given me last Christmas. If I was going to face down some corporate shark from New York, I was going to do it with dignity. Marcus met me in the waiting room, and I could see the curiosity in his eyes. "They arrived about 10 minutes ago," he said quietly. "Harold, I have to tell you, this isn't what I expected." "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, the door to his office opened, and a woman stepped out. She was perhaps 45, with shoulder-length brown hair streaked with gray and wearing a simple black dress. There was something familiar about her face, something that nagged at the edges of my memory. "Mr. Brennan?" Her voice was soft, with just a trace of nervousness. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I'm Catherine Morrison." Morrison. The name hit me like a lightning bolt, and suddenly I knew why she looked familiar. The eyes were the same, that particular shade of green, and the way she tilted her head when she spoke. "David Morrison's daughter," I said, the words coming out as barely a whisper. She nodded, and I saw tears gathering in her eyes. "Yes, I know this must be a shock." A shock. That was an understatement. David Morrison had been my best friend for 20 years, from the time we were both young fathers, trying to figure out how to raise kids and run farms. His daughter Catherine had been Sarah's closest friend growing up, practically a second daughter to Martha and me, but that was 30 years ago before everything went wrong. "Please, let's sit down," Marcus said, leading us into his office. "I think we all have a lot to discuss." Catherine took the chair across from me, and for a moment we just stared at each other. I was seeing David in her features, the determined set of her jaw, the way she clasped her hands together when she was nervous. But I was also seeing the little girl who used to play in my barn with Sarah, who'd eaten Sunday dinners at our table, who'd cried in my arms the day her father left town. "I should have called first," she said finally. "I should have explained, but I wasn't sure you'd see me if you knew who I was." "Catherine, what's this about? Why are you buying my farm?" She took a deep breath, gathering herself, because it should never have left our families in the first place, because some mistakes take 30 years to fix, and this is my chance to fix one. The memories came flooding back then, painful and sharp as broken glass. David Morrison, my closest friend and neighbor, whose farm had bordered mine on the eastern side. Our families had been inseparable. David and his wife Elena, Martha and me, and our daughters, who were born just 6 months apart. We'd shared harvests, helped each other through droughts, celebrated holidays together, until the accusation that destroyed everything. "Catherine, what happened between your father and me was based on a lie," she interrupted, her voice suddenly stronger. "A lie that I lived with for 30 years, until Dad finally told me the truth on his deathbed 2 years ago." The knot in my stomach tightened. "What truth?" She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age. My name was written on the front in David's distinctive handwriting. "He wrote this letter to you in 1995, right after he left Iowa, but he never sent it. He was too proud, too ashamed. He carried it with him for 28 years, and when he was dying, he made me promise to bring it to you." My hands shook as I took the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in David's familiar script. As I read, the words seemed to leap off the page, each one hitting me like a physical blow. "Harold, by the time you read this, I'll probably be dead because I'm too much of a coward to face you while I'm alive. You were right about the money. You were right about everything. I did steal from the co-op account, $50,000 over 2 years, skimming a little at a time when I was treasurer. Elena's cancer treatments, the medical bills, they were destroying us, and I thought I could replace the money before anyone noticed. When the audit found the missing funds, I should have confessed. Instead, I let everyone think it was you. I let our friendship die rather than admit I was a thief. I destroyed your reputation, lost you friends, made people question your integrity. The worst part is you knew. You figured out it was me, but you never said anything publicly. You could have cleared your name, but it would have meant destroying mine, and you couldn't do that to Elena and Catherine. I've lived with this guilt for 30 years. I've built a successful business in California, made more money than I ever dreamed of back in Iowa, but none of it matters because it's all built on the foundation of betraying the best friend I ever had. I'm leaving Catherine everything, including the truth. Maybe she can find a way to make amends that I never could. Tell her about the man you really were, Harold. Tell her about the friend who sacrificed his own reputation to protect a family that was already suffering. I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry, David. I read the letter twice before I could speak, my vision blurred by tears I hadn't expected. 30 years. For 30 years I'd carried the weight of suspicion and whispered accusations. Even though the charges were never filed, there wasn't enough evidence. The damage to my reputation had been devastating. Friends had stopped calling, business relationships had soured, and the stress of it all had contributed to Martha's decision that we should keep to ourselves, trust no one but each other. I remember when your father left, I said finally, my voice rough. You were 15. You came to say goodbye and you were crying. Catherine nodded. I didn't understand why we were leaving so suddenly. Dad said it was for a better job opportunity, but I knew something was wrong. And then over the years, I heard bits and pieces about the co-op scandal, about suspicions and investigations. But Dad never told me the whole truth until the end. Your father was a good man who made a bad decision, I said. The cancer treatments. I remember how expensive they were. Elena was fighting for her life. That doesn't excuse what he did to you. Catherine's voice was fierce now. When I found out the truth, I was furious. Furious at Dad for being a coward, furious at myself for not seeing it sooner. But mostly I was heartbroken thinking about how much pain our family caused yours. Marcus cleared his throat gently. Catherine, perhaps you should explain your proposal to Mr. Brennan. She straightened in her chair, and I could see her shifting into business mode. I've done very well for myself in California. I started a tech company 15 years ago, sold it last year for more money than I know what to do with. When Dad died and left me that letter, I knew I had to find a way to make things right. So you decided to buy my farm? I decided to save it. I've been following the situation from afar. I still have friends in the area who keep me informed about local news. When I heard about your daughter putting the farm on the market, I knew I had to act fast. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. Harold, I don't want your farm for development or investment. I want to deed it back to you, free and clear. No mortgage, no strings attached. It's the only way I can think of to begin making amends for what my family took from you. The words didn't make sense at first. Deed it back to me? I buy it from your daughter's sale, then immediately transfer ownership back to you. You keep your home, your legacy, everything. And maybe, she paused, looking uncertain for the first time since she'd arrived. Maybe we can begin to heal the damage that was done to both our families. I stared at her, speechless. After 30 years of carrying the burden of false suspicion, after watching my reputation slowly rebuild itself through decades of honest living, after facing the loss of everything I held dear, salvation was sitting across from me in the form of David Morrison's daughter. Why? I finally managed to ask. Why would you do this? Because 30 years ago, your daughter Sarah lost her best friend when we moved away. Because you and Martha were like second parents to me, and I lost that too. Because my father's cowardice robbed all of us of family, and family is worth more than money. Tears were streaming down my face now, and I didn't care. Catherine, I can't accept this. It's too much. It's not enough, she said firmly. It will never be enough to make up for what we put you through, but it's a start. If you have ever experienced a moment that changed everything in your life, leave me a comment telling me from which country you are listening to me. I looked at Marcus, who was watching this exchange with amazement. Is this legal? Can she really do this? Absolutely. he said. "If Catherine purchases the property and then chooses to deed it back to you, there's nothing to stop her, though I'd recommend we structure it carefully for tax purposes." I turned back to Catherine, this woman who had been like a daughter to me once, who had disappeared from my life because of her father's shame and my own stubborn pride. "There's one condition," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "You come back. Not permanently, but regularly. This farm has always been about family, and you were family once. Maybe it's time to remember what that means." The smile that broke across her face was radiant, lighting up her whole expression and making her look like the 15-year-old girl who used to help Martha bake cookies in my kitchen. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Brennan. I'd like that very much." As we shook hands across Marcus's desk, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years. Hope. Not just hope for saving my farm, but hope for healing old wounds, for rebuilding bridges that had been burned by pride and misunderstanding. The mystery buyer hadn't been a corporate predator after all. She'd been family, coming home at last. I drove home from Marcus Webb's office in a daze, my mind struggling to process everything that had happened. Catherine Morrison, little Kathy, who used to braid Martha's hair and help her make apple pies, was going to save my farm. After 30 years of carrying the weight of David's betrayal, redemption had arrived in the most unexpected form. But as I pulled into my driveway, I saw Sarah's silver SUV parked by the front porch, and my brief moment of peace evaporated. She was sitting on the porch steps, her phone pressed to her ear, gesturing animatedly as she spoke. When she saw me, she ended the call abruptly and stood up. "Daddy, we need to talk. My lawyer says you can't just cancel this sale. There are contracts, legal obligations. Sarah, sit down." I climbed the porch steps slowly, feeling every one of my 72 years. "There's something you need to know about the buyer." She remained standing, her jaw set in that stubborn way that reminded me so much of myself. "I don't care who the buyer is. What matters is that you're safe and taken care of. This farm is too much for you to handle alone. The buyer is Catherine Morrison." The name hit her like a physical blow. I watched the color drain from her face as she slowly sank back down onto the steps. Kathy Morrison? She's been living in California, built a tech company, made a fortune, and she wants to buy the farm to deed it back to me. Sarah stared at me in stunned silence for a long moment. Then her expression hardened. "That's impossible. Why would she do that? She disappeared from our lives 30 years ago without even a proper goodbye." I sat down beside her on the steps, looking out at the fields that had been in our family for 5 generations, because her father confessed something on his deathbed. Something that changes everything we thought we knew about why the Morrison family left. "What are you talking about?" I pulled David's letter from my jacket pocket. My hands were still shaking slightly as I handed it to her. "Read this." I watched Sarah's face as she read, saw the confusion give way to understanding, then to shock, and finally to something that looked like grief. When she finished, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Dad, I don't understand. If you knew Mr. Morrison was innocent of stealing from the co-op, why didn't you ever say anything? Why did you let people suspect you?" "Because David wasn't innocent. He was guilty. But Elena was dying, Catherine was just a kid, and destroying David publicly wouldn't have brought the money back. It would have just destroyed what was left of his family. So you let your own reputation suffer to protect theirs." I shrugged. "Your mother and I talked about it. We decided we could live with whispered suspicions better than David could live with his family knowing he was a thief. We had each other, we had you, we had this farm. We thought that was enough." Sarah was crying now, real tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. "But it wasn't enough, was it? You both became more isolated after that. You stopped going to church, stopped socializing with neighbors. You built walls around yourselves." She was right, of course. The suspicion and gossip had changed us, made us more insular, more suspicious of outsiders. It had taken years to rebuild even basic trust with our neighbors, and by then, Martha and I had gotten used to relying only on each other. "Maybe that's why your mother's death hit me so hard," I admitted. "For 30 years, she was my only real confidant. When she died, I didn't know how to connect with anyone else anymore, including me," Sarah said quietly. The words hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we should cross. She was right about that too. After Martha died, I'd pushed Sarah away, insisted I was fine when I wasn't, refused help when I needed it. I'd become so used to protecting others that I'd forgotten how to let others protect me. "I was trying to be strong for you," I said, "the way I thought your mother would have wanted. Mom wouldn't have wanted you to suffer alone, Dad. She would have wanted you to lean on the people who love you." Sarah's voice broke. "She would have wanted you to lean on me." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw not the controlling woman who had tried to sell my farm behind my back, but the scared little girl who had lost her mother and was terrified of losing her father too. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm sorry I shut you out. Sorry I made you feel like you had to take drastic measures to protect me. And I'm sorry I went behind your back with the sale. I'm sorry I didn't trust you to make your own decisions." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I was so scared, Dad. Every time I called, and you didn't answer on the first ring, every time you sounded tired or confused, I imagined the worst. I imagined getting a call from the sheriff saying they'd found you. Like they found old Peterson last winter?" She nodded. Frank Peterson had lived alone on his farm until he was 86, when they'd found him at the bottom of his basement stairs after he'd been dead for 3 days. It had shaken the whole community, but it had apparently terrified my daughter. "Sarah, I understand your fear, but you can't protect me from every possible danger. At some point you have to trust that I'm capable of making my own choices about my own life, even if those choices seem wrong to me. Especially then." I reached over and took her hand. "Your mother and I raised you to be independent, to think for yourself, to stand up for what you believe in. I can't complain now when you do exactly that, even if it's in opposition to me." We sat in silence for a while, holding hands like we hadn't done since she was a child. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me of the way Martha used to describe her perfect evenings. "So, what happens now?" Sarah asked finally. "With Catherine? With the farm? With us? Now we figure out how to be a family again. Catherine is going to need legal documents drawn up to transfer the deed back to me after the sale closes. You're going to need to accept that your father is a stubborn old man who intends to live on this farm until they carry him out feet first." Sarah laughed despite her tears. "And you're going to need to accept that your daughter is a stubborn middle-aged woman who's going to worry about you no matter what. I think I can live with that." I squeezed her hand. "But Sarah, I need you to understand something. When my time comes, whenever that is, I want it to be here, in the house where I was born, where you were born, where your mother died. This place isn't just property to me. It's the physical manifestation of our family's story. I know that now." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Tell me about Catherine. What was she like when we were kids?" I smiled, remembering. "She was like a second daughter to your mother and me, quieter than you, more thoughtful, but brave in her own way. Do you remember the time you two decided to build a fort in the old oak tree? And we fell out and I broke my arm?" Sarah laughed. "Kathy was so scared she was going to get in trouble, but Mom just hugged her and told her that's what families do. They take care of each other when someone gets hurt. She cried harder than you did when we took you to the hospital. I remember her helping Mom in the kitchen, always wanting to learn how to cook. And she was so gentle with the animals. Remember how she used to talk to the horses like they could understand every word? Your mother always said Catherine had an old soul, said she was born understanding things that took other people years to learn. We talked about Catherine and those golden summers, when our families had been so close, when the kids ran freely between the two farms, and the adults shared everything from farming equipment to holiday dinners. It felt good to remember those times, to dust off memories that had been tainted by the way things ended. Where are you watching this story from? I would love to know which city you are joining me from as we remember the power of family bonds." "Dad," Sarah said eventually, "I want to be here when Catherine comes back. I want to apologize to her for the way I acted when they left. I was so angry that she was moving away and I said some terrible things. You were 15 years old and your best friend was disappearing from your life without explanation. You had every right to be angry, but I want to make it right now. We're not 15 anymore. Maybe we can be friends again, real friends." "I'd like that," I said. "I think your mother would have liked that too." As if summoned by our conversation, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something told me to answer. "Mr. Brennan, this is Catherine. I hope I'm not calling too late." "Not at all. Sarah's here with me, actually. We've been talking about you. Good things, I hope." I could hear the smile in her voice. "I wanted to let you know that I'm staying in town for a few days to handle the paperwork. I was wondering, would it be presumptuous of me to ask if I could see the farm again? It's been 30 years, and I have so many memories of that place." I looked at Sarah, who was nodding eagerly. "Catherine, why don't you come for dinner tomorrow night? Sarah will be here and we can show you around, catch up properly." "I'd love that. Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself. And maybe some stories about what you've been doing for the past 30 years. After I hung up, Sarah and I sat on the porch as darkness fell around us, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of wind through the corn. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I wasn't facing the future alone. "Dad?" Sarah's voice was soft in the darkness. "Yeah? I love you. And I'm sorry it took almost losing this place for me to remember what really matters. I love you too, sweetheart. And tomorrow, we start rebuilding what we almost lost." As we sat there in the gathering dusk, I realized that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the greatest losses. I'd almost lost my farm, but I was gaining back my daughter and my oldest friend's child. Maybe Martha had been right all along. Sometimes things happen for a reason. The next day passed in a blur of nervous energy and preparation. Sarah had driven back to Chicago early that morning to get some clothes and cancel her meetings for the rest of the week. She'd be back by 5, she'd promised, in time to help with dinner for Catherine. I spent the morning cleaning the house with more care than I'd shown it since Martha died. I dusted the piano that hadn't been played in 3 years, polished the dining room table that had only seen cereal bowls and TV dinners lately, and even put fresh sheets on the guest room bed, just in case Catherine wanted to stay the night instead of driving back to her hotel in town. By afternoon, I was pacing the kitchen like a caged animal, second-guessing everything. What if this dinner was a mistake? What if 30 years was too long to bridge? What if the little girl I remembered had grown into someone completely different, someone who couldn't possibly fit back into the space she'd left behind? At 4:30, I heard Sarah's car in the driveway. She came through the front door carrying grocery bags and wearing a smile I hadn't seen in years. "I stopped at Henderson's Market," she announced, unpacking ingredients. "Thought we should make Mum's famous pot roast. Catherine always loved it when we were kids." "You remember the recipe?" Sarah pulled a yellowed index card from her purse. "I took this from Mom's recipe box years ago. Figured someday I'd want to make it for my own family." Her voice caught slightly. "Never thought it would be for this." We worked together in the kitchen, and for the first time since Martha's death, the house felt alive again. Sarah seasoned the roast while I peeled potatoes, and we fell into an easy rhythm that reminded me of countless Sunday dinners when she was growing up. "Dad," Sarah said as she sliced carrots, "what if she doesn't remember us the way we remember her? What if we're just strangers to her now? Then we'll get to know each other again," I said. "Sometimes that's the best part of reconnecting with old friends, discovering who they've become." At exactly 6 o'clock, I saw a rental car coming up the long gravel drive. My heart started pounding as it parked next to Sarah's SUV. Through the kitchen window, I watched Catherine step out, and for a moment, time seemed to collapse. She moved with the same grace she'd had as a teenager, but there was a confidence in her posture that spoke of success and hard-won wisdom. She'd changed from her business attire into jeans and a simple green sweater that brought out her eyes. In her hands, she carried a bottle of wine and what looked like a small wrapped package. Sarah reached the front door first, and I held my breath as the two women faced each other for the first time in 30 years. They were both crying before either of them spoke. "Kathy," Sarah whispered. "Sarah," Catherine's voice was thick with emotion. "Look at you, you're so beautiful." They embraced on the front porch, holding each other tight, and I had to wipe my own eyes as I watched. These had been inseparable once, two little girls who'd shared secrets and dreams and adventures. Now they were middle-aged women who'd lived entire lives apart, but the connection was still there, still strong. "I'm so sorry," Sarah was saying. "I'm sorry for the things I said when you left. Sorry I was too angry to understand." "Stop," Catherine said gently. "We were kids. We didn't understand what the adults were going through. There's nothing to forgive." I stepped onto the porch then, and Catherine turned to me with that radiant smile I remembered from when she was 15. "Mr. Brennan." She hugged me carefully, mindful of my age, but I hugged her back with all the strength I had. "Thank you for welcoming me back. This will always be your home, Catherine, always." We moved inside, and I watched Catherine's eyes take in every detail of the living room. Nothing had changed much since she'd last been here. The same furniture, the same family photos on the mantel, even the same Afghan Martha had crocheted draped over the back of the couch. "It's exactly the same," she said wonderfully. "It's like stepping back in time." "Dad's not much for change," Sarah said with a fond smile, "though I'm working on getting him to at least update the kitchen appliances from the 1980s. Catherine laughed. "Some things should stay the same. This house, it feels like safety, like family." During dinner, the years seemed to melt away. Catherine told us about her life in California, how she'd put herself through college on scholarships, started her tech company in her garage, built it into something worth millions before selling it to focus on philanthropy. But more than her success, I was struck by her humility, her genuine interest in our lives. Tell me about Martha, she said quietly during dessert. I was so sorry to hear about her passing. She was like a second mother to me. Sarah and I shared stories about Martha's final years, her battle with cancer, her determination to see every sunrise from the front porch, her insistence on baking cookies for the church bake sale, even when she was too weak to stand for long. She talked about you, I told Catherine. Even at the end, she wondered how you were doing, whether you were happy, whether you'd found someone to love who loved you back. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. I never married. I came close a few times, but she shrugged. I think I was always looking for what my parents had before everything went wrong. The kind of partnership I saw between you and Martha. Maybe you'll find it yet, Sarah said gently. It's never too late for love. After dinner, we moved to the front porch with coffee and the wine Catherine had brought. The evening air was warm and sweet with the scent of honeysuckle, and the fireflies were beginning their nightly dance in the gathering dusk. I brought you something, Catherine said, retrieving the wrapped package from her car. I wasn't sure if you'd want it, but she handed it to me and I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a framed photograph I hadn't seen in 30 years, the 4 adults and 2 girls at Sarah's 16th birthday party. We were all laughing at something, probably one of David's terrible jokes, and we looked so young, so happy, so unaware of how quickly everything could change. I've carried this with me everywhere I've lived, Catherine said, but I think it belongs here with the family that made me feel loved when I needed it most. I stared at the photo, remembering that day. It had been just 2 months before the co-op scandal broke, before David left town in shame, before everything fell apart. We'd had no idea we were living in the last days of our innocence. Dad and I talked about that party last week, Sarah said softly, about how happy we all were, how close our families were. I've missed that feeling my whole adult life. So have I, Catherine admitted. I've been successful. I've traveled the world. I've accomplished more than I ever dreamed, but I've never felt as much at home anywhere as I did in this house, with this family. If you've ever longed for a home you lost, a family you were separated from, tell me from which part of the world you're listening to this story. You know, I said slowly, Martha and I always regretted that we never had more children. We tried for years after Sarah, but it wasn't meant to be. But for a few precious years we felt like we had 2 daughters. Losing you was almost as hard as losing David's friendship. Catherine was crying openly now. I used to dream about coming back. Even as an adult, even after I'd built my own life, I'd dream about walking up this drive, sitting on this porch, being part of this family again. You are part of this family, Sarah said firmly. You always were. Time and distance and hurt feelings don't change that. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. I thought about the strange turns life takes, how pain and loss can sometimes lead to unexpected gifts. 3 days ago, I'd thought I was losing everything. Now I was sitting on my porch with my daughter and the girl who'd been like a daughter, planning a future I'd never dared to hope for. Catherine, I said eventually, I know you said you want to deed the farm back to me, but I've been thinking about that. What if instead we made it a partnership? You own half, I own half, Sarah inherits everything when I'm gone. That way you're not just giving me a gift, you're investing in a legacy that belongs to both our families. Catherine looked surprised. You'd want that? You'd want me as a partner? I'd want you as family, I corrected. The partnership is just the legal part. You've always been family. Sarah reached over and took both our hands. I think Mom would have loved this, she said. She always believed that family wasn't just about blood. It was about love and choice and showing up for each other when it matters. Then it's settled, Catherine said. Partners in the Morrison-Brennan farm. The Brennan-Morrison farm, I corrected with a smile. Either way, Sarah laughed, it's going to need some serious updating, starting with that kitchen. As the evening wound down, Catherine accepted our invitation to stay in the guest room rather than drive back to her hotel. Sarah helped her carry her things upstairs to the room that had been hers during countless sleepovers 30 years ago. Later, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard soft voices and laughter from the kitchen. I looked down the stairs and saw Sarah and Catherine sitting at the kitchen table, sharing stories and catching up on 3 decades of separate lives. They looked so natural together, so right, that it was easy to imagine they were teenagers again, whispering secrets over midnight snacks. I thought about Martha as I climbed into bed, wished she could have been here to see this reunion, this healing, but maybe, in some way, she was here. Maybe her love for Catherine, her belief in the importance of family, had somehow guided us all back to each other, For the first time in 3 years, I fell asleep easily, lulled by the sound of my daughter's laughter and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new possibilities, new hope, and new beginnings for all of us. The farm was saved, but more than that, our family was whole again. 6 months later, I stood on my front porch watching the sunrise paint the wheat fields gold, just as I had on that terrible morning when I'd first discovered Sarah's betrayal. But everything was different now. The coffee cup in my hands was filled from a brand new coffee maker that Catherine had insisted on buying when she'd moved into the renovated apartment above the barn. The chair beside me, Martha's chair, now held Sarah's laptop as she worked remotely from the farm 3 days a week, her Chicago consulting business thriving with her new work-life balance. Most importantly, I wasn't alone anymore. "Morning, Harold," Catherine called from the barn, where she was feeding the horses we'd bought last month. She'd insisted that a proper farm needed proper animals, and watching her gentle way with them reminded me so much of the little girl who used to whisper to our old mare Buttercup. "Morning," I called back, marveling at how natural it felt to have her there. She'd officially moved back to Iowa 4 months ago, selling her California house and relocating her foundation's headquarters to our small town. "You're an Iowa success story," the local newspaper had declared when they'd featured her on the front page. "Giving back to the community that shaped you." Sarah emerged from the kitchen carrying her own coffee and the morning mail, looking more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. The stress lines around her eyes had softened, and she'd started wearing her hair down instead of in the severe bun she'd favored during her corporate executive days. "Dad, you got something from the Historical Society," she said, handing me an official-looking envelope. I opened it carefully, my old fingers struggling slightly with the thick paper. Inside was a beautifully printed certificate declaring the Brennan Morrison Farm an official Iowa historical landmark, recognizing our family's 150-year contribution to Iowa agriculture. "Well, I'll be damned," I said, then immediately looked around to make sure no one had heard me curse. Old habits die hard. "What is it?" Catherine asked, jogging over from the barn. I showed them the certificate, and Sarah squealed with delight, actually squealed like she had when she was 10 years old, and I'd surprised her with a new bicycle. "Dad, this is incredible. They want to put up a historical marker by the road. Brennan Morrison Farm, established 1873, continuously operated by the same families for 5 generations. 5 generations, Catherine repeated wonderingly, and now we're starting the 6th. She was right about that. The farm had new life flowing through it now. Catherine had used her tech background to modernize our operations, installing solar panels and efficient irrigation systems that had actually increased our crop yields while reducing costs. She'd also started a small organic garden that supplied Miller's Diner and 2 restaurants in the county seat, creating a new revenue stream that had surprised everyone with its success. Sarah had thrown herself into researching grants for historical preservation and sustainable farming practices, her business skills finding new ways to honor our past while building for the future. She'd even started dating again, a nice widower named Robert who owned the hardware store in town and who had the patience to listen to her talk about soil composition and heritage seed varieties for hours. "You know what this calls for," Sarah said with a grin. "We need to have a celebration, a proper party like the old days. Like your 16th birthday party," Catherine added, and we all smiled at the memory. "Better than that," I said, an idea forming in my mind. "Let's have a harvest festival. Invite the whole community, celebrate the farm's recognition and our new partnership, make it an annual tradition." "I love that idea," Catherine said. "We could set up booths in the barn, have live music, maybe ask some of the other historical farms to participate. And we could honor Dad properly," Sarah added. "Recognize what he's done to preserve this legacy, what he sacrificed to protect other families." The mention of sacrifice made me think of David Morrison, and I felt the familiar pang of regret that he hadn't lived to see this reconciliation. But Catherine seemed to read my thoughts. "Dad would have loved this," she said softly. "He carried his guilt about you for 30 years, but he also carried his love for this place, for your family. He used to tell stories about the harvest parties you used to have, about how this farm was the heart of the community. It can be again," I said. "Different than before, but still a place where people come together." Over the next month, we threw ourselves into planning the Harvest Festival with an enthusiasm that reminded me of the old days when Martha would organize church socials and community events. Catherine used her business connections to secure sponsorships. Sarah handled the logistics with military precision, and I found myself in charge of what they diplomatically called community outreach, which mostly meant calling every person I'd known for the past 70 years and personally inviting them to come. The response was overwhelming. Tom Patterson and his wife were coming, of course, as were the Henderson boys and their families. Bill Morrison, no relation to David, but coincidentally sharing the name, was bringing his bluegrass band. Dr. Morrison, now retired, wanted to set up a booth about rural healthcare history. Even Frank Tucker, who was 87 and hadn't left his farm in 2 years, insisted his grandson drive him over for the festivities. But the call that surprised me most came 3 days before the festival. "Mr. Brennan, this is Elena Morrison Santos." Elena, David's wife, Catherine's mother, who I hadn't spoken to since they'd left Iowa 30 years ago. My heart started pounding. "Eleanor," I managed. How are you?" "I'm well, thank you. I'm calling from Phoenix, where I've been living since David passed. Catherine told me about the festival, about your reconciliation, about the farm partnership." Her voice was exactly as I remembered, warm, musical, with just a trace of the Spanish accent that had made David fall in love with her when they were both 19. "I hope she also told you that I never blamed you or her for what happened," I said quickly. "David was a good man who made a mistake. I never held that against his family. She told me." Eleanor's voice was thick with emotion. "Harold, I need you to know something. I wanted David to tell you the truth from the beginning. I begged him to confess, to face the consequences honestly. But he was so ashamed, so terrified of losing everything, that he convinced himself running away was the only option." "Eleanor, you don't need to explain." "Yes, I do. For 30 years, I've lived with the knowledge that your reputation was damaged because my husband was too proud to take responsibility for his actions. I've wanted to contact you so many times, to apologize, to thank you for protecting Catherine and me when you could have destroyed us. I had to sit down. The weight of her words, the pain I could hear in her voice, brought back all the complicated emotions of that time. You were fighting cancer," I said. "You had a 15-year-old daughter. I couldn't add to your suffering." "That's exactly what Catherine said you would say." Elena was crying now. "Harold, I want to come to your festival. I want to see the farm again, to thank you properly, to honor what you and Martha did for my family." "Eleanor, you don't need to travel all that way." "Yes, I do. I'm 74 years old, and I've spent 3 decades carrying guilt that belongs to me as much as it belonged to David. It's time to come home." The day of the Harvest Festival dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of brilliant blue October sky that makes Iowa feel like the most beautiful place on earth. By 10 in the morning, cars were lining our gravel drive and filling the makeshift parking area Catherine had arranged in the south pasture. The barn had been transformed into a festival hall, with booths selling everything from homemade preserves to hand-forged horseshoes. Bill Morrison's band was set up on a small stage Sarah had rented, filling the air with fiddle music and harmony vocals that had people tapping their feet and singing along. But the moment that made my heart skip was when I saw a familiar figure walking slowly up the drive, leaning slightly on a carved wooden cane, but moving with determined grace. Elena looked older, of course, her dark hair now silver-white, but her smile was exactly the same. Catherine reached her first, and the embrace between mother and daughter brought tears to my eyes. Then Elena was walking toward me, and suddenly we were both crying as we hugged, 2 old friends finally able to acknowledge the pain they'd shared and the forgiveness they'd found. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for protecting my daughter when I couldn't." "Thank you for coming home," I whispered back. As the day unfolded, I found myself standing in the center of a celebration that felt like a dream come true. Sarah was giving tours of the house to anyone who wanted to see how a 19th century Iowa farmhouse had been lovingly preserved. Catherine was demonstrating her organic farming techniques to a group of young farmers who hung on her every word. Elena was sitting in Martha's chair on the front porch, holding court with a group of older women who remembered her from the old days. Tom Patterson found me as the sun was beginning to set, painting the celebration in golden light. "Harold," he said, clapping me on the shoulder, "this is what the community used to feel like. This is what we lost when your families were separated, and what we've found again," I replied, watching Catherine and Sarah work together to serve apple cider to a group of children who were running around the yard with the same wild joy that Sarah and Catherine had once shown. As the evening wound down and the last of the guests headed home, the 4 of us, Sarah, Catherine, Elena, and I, sat on the front porch, sharing stories and watching the stars emerge in the clear October sky. "Harold," Elena said quietly, "David would have been so proud to see this. to see what you've built, what you've preserved, what you've forgiven. He would have been proud of Catherine, I replied. Look what she's accomplished. Look how she's chosen to use her success to give back. That's the legacy he really left. Sarah reached over and took my hand. Dad, I know I almost destroyed all of this with my fear and my need to control everything, but sitting here now, seeing how happy you are, how alive this place feels again, I understand why you fought so hard to save it. You didn't almost destroy anything, I told her. You were trying to protect the person you love most in the world. That's exactly what family does. Catherine pulled out her phone and asked a neighbor to take a photo of the four of us sitting on the porch, with the historical landmark certificate propped up against the railing behind us. As the camera flashed, I thought about Martha, about David, about all the people who had loved this place and been shaped by it. Tell me, from whatever corner of the world you're joining us tonight, have you ever experienced a moment when everything came full circle, when healing finally found its way home? You know, I said as we prepared to head inside, Martha always believed that everything happens for a reason. I used to think that was just her way of making sense of pain and loss. But sitting here tonight with all of you, I'm starting to think she might have been right. What do you mean? Sarah asked. If David hadn't made his mistake 30 years ago, Catherine might never have left Iowa. She might never have built her company, never developed the skills and resources that allowed her to save this farm. If you hadn't tried to sell the farm, Catherine might never have had the opportunity to come home and make amends. Sometimes, the worst things that happen to us create the space for the best things to find us. That's a beautiful way to think about it, Eleanor said. David always said you were the wisest man he knew. I see why now. As we made our way inside, I took one last look at the farm spread out in the moonlight. The fields were stubbled now after the harvest, waiting for winter's rest before spring's renewal. The old oak tree stood sentinel by the house, its branches reaching toward the stars like arms raised in celebration. In 6 months, everything had changed, yet everything was exactly as it should be. The farm was safe, the family was whole, and the future stretched ahead of us bright with possibility. I thought about the morning when I'd discovered Sarah's betrayal, when I'd felt like my world was ending. I couldn't have imagined then that the crisis would lead not to loss, but to the greatest gift of my later years, the return of family I thought I'd lost forever. Sometimes the best endings are really new beginnings. Sometimes coming home means traveling further than you ever thought possible. And sometimes, the people who try to sell your dreams are really just trying to help you find them again. As I climbed the stairs to bed, I could hear Sarah and Catherine talking quietly in the kitchen, planning improvements for next year's festival, dreaming about the future of our farm. Their voices mixed with the night sounds of the Iowa countryside, crickets and owls and the distant whisper of wind through corn. I fell asleep smiling, grateful for second chances, for stubborn daughters, for prodigal friends who find their way home, and for the enduring power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. The Brennan Morrison farm would continue for another generation, and probably many generations after that. Some legacies are worth fighting for, some families are worth saving, and sometimes the best way to protect what you love is to open your heart and let it grow.